Okay, so just to kind of recap a little bit of where we are. Um, Agencies or departments or cabinets or something like that, they regulate something that people want, need, buy, sell, care about, whatever. So EPA regulates environmental pollution. The FCC regulates the different airways and broadband spectrums and things like that. The Securities and Exchange Commission regulates the rules covering buying and selling of stocks, right? So all of these things are regulated by some agency. So we want to make sure that our food is clean, that your granny's social security check arrives on time, that the toy that you give your little kid doesn't isn't covered in paint that contains a whole bunch of lead, right? Which could poison or kill them. So these are things that we want, things that we're involved in buying and selling, things that we care about. And in America, these things are regulated to some degree by a bureaucratic agency. And those agencies are in turn regulated or controlled or whatever you want to say by Congress and or the president. And the judicial branch has some role as well, but they come in kind of after the fact, right? Just by virtue of them being tied to the legal process, the judicial process, I should say. Um, so all these things that we looked at just a second ago that people care about or buy and sell or need, well, they're all regulated by some bureaucratic agency. So your granny's social security check is administered by the Social Security Administration. Whenever you go to a gas station, you fill up. Well, you whether or not you're getting a full gallon, well, that's regulated by the Department of Agriculture. They send folks out to gas stations and they'll do random spot checks all the time, all across the country, um, just to make sure that when you pay for a full gallon of gas, you're getting a full gallon of gas. Not 80% of a gallon, not 95% of a gallon, but that full gallon. Each of these departments, Department of Labor, Social Security Administration, FDA, they are, again, to some degree controlled by some area of Congress. It might be a committee, it might be the president, it might be both of them together in different ways. So let's look at just kind of one example to help draw a few more conclusions and a few more key ideas out. So in the Senate today, there is a subcommittee known as the Senate Special Committee on Aging. And we see all the folks here are members of that particular committee. The chair is a Republican. Her name is Susan Collins, right? She is, Republicans have a majority in the Senate, so all of the committees and subcommittees also have a majority Republican. And again, the head of that of any committee or subcommittee is the chair. The highest ranking member of the minority party, so in the Senate right now, the Democratic Party, is known as the ranking member. So this is the head of the Democratic coalition on this particular subcommittee. All right, so just kind of the names and things like that don't really matter. I'm just kind of pulling this one as an example. Wanted to show you, put a few faces to the names, things like that. Elizabeth Warren, Marco Rubio might be some of the names you recognize from recent presidential runs. So let's say one day the chair and the ranking member, they're getting together and it's like, what do you want to do today? And the chair says, I don't know. And so they say, oh, you know what, let's go see what's up with Social Security, right? This is the Senate Special Committee on Aging. So one of the things they are tasked with is making sure that, hey, old people are taken care of in some capacity. So they would have a vested interest in making sure that Social Security is well funded for more than just the next, decade or two. That checks are getting out on time, stuff like that. So the Chair Collins and Ranking Member Casey decided to mosey on over to Social Security, and Social Security is great to see them. Hey, what's happening? So glad to have you over here. Social Security remembers that, hey, that Committee on Aging, well, they're going to make rules that govern Social Security. So Social Security needs to kind of be well aware of what's going on in this particular subcommittee. So they're going to welcome these senators with welcome arms, and so the chair might say, "Hey, what do you need from us?" Right? We don't know exactly what goes on, what exactly the elderly in America need right now. we're not there yet. We don't know. So they are reaching out to an agency that deals with the elderly in our society all the time. So, hey, Congress doesn't have the answer, so let's go to people who do. Let's get some information from those who interact with these folks all the time. Um, but on this particular day, Social Security is just kind of at a loss, right? Oh gosh, I don't really know, man. I don't know what to suggest. So everybody's kind of sitting around scratching their heads, and boom, here comes AARP. The AARP is the largest interest group in America, and to be a member, all you have to do is be over the age of 55. That's it. Um, and so it boasts a massive membership, and they show up and say, hey, I'm the American Association of Retired People, and hey, guess what? I deal with elderly people all day long. So I can get you all sorts of information. I'll tell you about their needs, I'll tell you about their wants, I'll tell you about their concerns, I'll tell you all sorts of stuff about them. And you know what? I might even be able to convince them to donate money to certain of you members on this particular subcommittee. I might even be able to convince some of these people who are able to get out and volunteer to help you, Susan Collins, and help you, Robert Casey Jr., get reelected. So all of a sudden, that sounds pretty good. Social Security would benefit because, AARP deals with, like, there's a lot of overlap in the people that these two groups deal with on a day-to-day basis. The senators are thinking, man, we can get some donations, we can get some volunteer help, and on top of that, we can also, oh yeah, I forgot, do our job of regulating this industry and making sure that the elderly are taken care of and figuring out what needs to be done. So AARP is willing to volunteer all this stuff, but at a cost, right? You better help us out. I'll provide you this information. I'll provide you with the names and email addresses of people who might want to donate money to you or volunteer to you, but you got to do something for us in exchange. So what we see here is this circular movement. So the senators, this subcommittee, they're the ones who are involved writing rules that govern Social Security. So, for example, how much money each person will get, who qualifies for Social Security, what age do they qualify it at. Social Security takes those rules and guidelines and then figures out how to make them happen, right? So again, the subcommittee is kind of giving broad guidelines, and then Social Security Administration figures out how to make it happen. They figure out how to implement all sorts of, they take that broad general guidance from the subcommittee, and then they make it into regulations. They make it into laws that then have to be followed and implemented. So Social Security figures out, okay, well, we can get a 5% boost to everyone's Social Security checks next month. AARP feels really, really good now because all of their members get an extra 5%, and they can go back to their members and say, hey, we did this for you, members, so keep paying your dues. And also, the people that really helped us out are these two senators in particular. So we can look at this situation and see, oh man, it looks, at least on the surface, right? It looks like everybody wins. Looks like everybody's winning. What we've got here is an example of what's known as an iron triangle. And just to kind of fill in some of the gaps here, right? AARP is that interest group, that lobby group, whose members are a bunch of older people in American society. We have a bureaucratic agency, so in this instance, the Social Security Administration. And we also have a congressional subcommittee or committee, right? So these people who are elected officials tasked with regulating a certain part of the economy. So here, this Senate Special Committee on Aging, it's their job to kind of regulate and keep an eye out and provide guidance to Social Security Administration, right? Oversee the Social Security Administration, so that as Social Security sends out its checks, everything is kind of above board, everything's following the rules and the laws and things like that. Social Security is supposed to kind of tell AARP, hey, here's the things you're allowed to do, here's the things you're not allowed to do, and to its members as well. all seems great, right? Who among us would like to see the elderly not taken care of, right? Nobody wants to see that, right? So this is sort of a very happy-go-lucky thing where information is getting sent around and everybody's quote unquote happy and taken care of. Now let's remember what arrangement we're talking about here. So within the bureaucracy, there are a number of agencies that regulate a thing, right? Whatever that thing is, and those agencies are in turn supposed to be guided or regulated themselves by Congress. So Congress and the president set the rules. Then the agency goes out and regulates those things and has some impact on the economy or society or politics in some way. Right? So it's supposed to be like that. But what if? What if there were people out there who made a living off of that thing, right? Whatever that thing is. What if they worked with that bureaucratic agency that's supposed to be regulating that thing? So it's all kind of nebulous right now, and that's probably the case. So just kind of bear with me for a moment. In this instance, we would have what's known as an iron triangle. Triangle, we've got 3 points, 3 groups involved: the bureaucratic agency, the interest group, and then the congressional subcommittee or committee that's related to that. And iron, right, this very, very strong thing. Iron triangles, or issue networks as they're sometimes called as well, as we'll see in the coming slides, are relationships between these three that become very powerful, very closely linked to one another, to the point that who is in charge of who becomes a little bit muddied, a little bit blurry. So to kind of draw this out a little bit further, let's take another real life example here. And we're going to focus in on smoking. And if you don't smoke, please don't ever start. It's a horrible, terrible habit. It'll kill you. If you are smokers, please stop. Do what you can. Reach out to folks. Enjoy your life a little bit more. So just going to leave it at that, and hopefully it helps. And if not, I'm sorry. But don't smoke. For real. You've probably, regardless of whether or not you're a smoker, you have certainly seen packs of cigarettes, whether it's at your convenience store or a friend has them, whatever it is. And every pack of cigarettes that's sold in America has this particular warning on it. And the language might change a little bit here and there, but basically it's going to be the same thing. Hey, if you smoke, all this bad stuff is going to happen health-wise, right? That's what it says. Every single pack in America legally required to have this printing on it. Other countries, they get a little bit more graphic, and that being said, I'm going to tell you, we're about to see a pretty graphic image. So if you'd like to just kind of close your eyes for a moment, I'll let you know when the image is off the screen. But again, other countries have images such as this, and here comes that graphic image. Full color photographs such as these that are on the fronts, not the sides, not just text, not just black and white, but full on color images like this. Now, I'm going to ask the question, why do you think in America we can just get away with, this black and white text, whereas other countries require very graphic images such as these, right? What's the difference? And all right, so that image is off the screen now if you had in fact turned away. Well, which one of those packs do you think sells a lot more, right? Which one is gonna hook you? Which one's gonna turn you off of smoking more, right? That full color image, if you saw that and you were on the fence about, man, do I want to smoke or not, or man, I'm thinking about quitting, but right, if you see that any of those 3 images, it's certainly gonna, or rather, it's almost certainly going to have an impact on you. My wife and I studied in Rome, Italy for a while when we were undergraduates, and there were images of cigarettes. My wife smoked at the time, or rather, not my wife. She was just some girl I knew, but she smoked at the time, and she would have some, and I'm wish I was making this up, but there was on one pack that she bought an image of a stillborn child who was born to whose mother was a smoker. So highly, very powerful image. Um, we don't have those here because of an iron triangle, right? You can imagine that the tobacco industry certainly doesn't want to have to put that on the product that they're selling. The companies that make a money selling paper, selling the farmers that grow tobacco, the truck drivers who carry it from one farm in Virginia to wherever it's being sold in America, right? They're all making money off of this. So they have a vested interest in keeping the cigarette warning labels in America, just that text. And so to help ensure that that is the case, well, they volunteer all sorts of information to Congress. They'll say, hey, well, look at this information. And they'll remind Congress that, hey, this is America. People can choose blah, 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 right? They can do everything they can. And they can also perhaps arrange for donations from smokers or from other companies that make money off of the tobacco industry to go to people in Congress to help them get reelected. And if these folks do get reelected, the smoking industry will say, hey, 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 remember how we helped you out? Could you help us out, please? So now Congress gets involved, and those same congressional members who maybe received money from tobacco industry or who come from states that get a lot of money off of tobacco farming or something, whatever it is, they will direct the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They will direct the Department of Agriculture to, hey, maybe you go a little bit lighter on those regulations that you're putting out. Hey, maybe you don't enforce the rules on the book as strongly. Maybe you take a little bit more lenient perspective when you are investigating claims. So rather than Department of Agriculture making rules that benefit you and me, just the average non-smoker person in America, now they are being directed by their bosses, by Congress, to make rules that are more beneficial to these interest groups. So the order the hierarchy here is flipped. The rules are not being made for Americans generally, for non-smokers, for non-tobacco states, but a lot of rules are being made to benefit this industry that's supposed to be regulated. Now, I use tobacco just as one example. It is by no means the only example of things like this that are present in America. There, just about every single industry, and teachers among them, just to be entirely forthright about this, there are interest groups that teachers are parts of. I'm not currently part of any of them, but they're out there and they push for more funding to go to schools, more money for textbooks. And you know what? Who's funding those? The textbook producers, because guess what? They make a whole bunch of money off of textbooks. So all sorts of industries have these, right? It is not just limited to old folks or tobacco. It's all over the place. So kind of keep that in mind, and any interest group that you find yourself kind of tied to. I mean, this is a very effective way to kind of get what you are trying to accomplish. Few last thoughts as we start to wrap up this lesson. There has been in recent years something known as devolution that is increasingly taking place, and this is particularly true as we are in the period of new federalism, where states are starting to push back against the federal government. So devolution is something that takes place when these regulations that have historically been done at the federal level, so enforced by the federal bureaucracy, well, they're taken away. Right? Congress might say, you know what, EPA, we don't want you to look into rivers that are less than 20 feet wide, or that only have water in them part of the year, right? So you're not allowed to deal with those anymore. So thanks to the 10th Amendment, now that devolves back to the states. And again, pluses and minuses to this sort of approach, but it bears mentioning that there is a tie here to that concept of subsidiarity, right? This idea that problems are oftentimes best dealt with by those who are closest to the problem itself. As we've seen several times today, the federal bureaucracy is taking over a lot of authority that properly belongs to the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. They are in charge, oftentimes tasked. The bureaucracy is often tasked with making regulations, creating the rules that you and I have to follow, enforcing those rules, and punishing people whenever those rules are violated. And if you feel like you have been, so say a factory feels like they've been unfairly targeted, well, they can file a grievance and they can take their claim to the EPA directly. And both sides will oftentimes have attorneys and they'll hash out this problem at the EPA. Right. So sometimes you can also go to the court system, the regular judicial process, but oftentimes the first step is to the to the bureaucratic agency itself. So we see powers that are legislative in nature, executive in nature, and judicial in their nature, and those branches aren't doing it. Rather, it's this quote unquote fourth branch of government that is taking over. So it's a huge amount of power. So we have to ask ourselves, why is Congress okay with this? Why is the executive okay with this? And some of the very clear reasons are, well, in part, they have to be. Right? Congress doesn't know, to keep harping on this, how much lead in the water is okay. The president doesn't know how much lead in the water is okay. So we have to rely on other sources of information other than Congress, or other than the executive, or sorry, other than the president itself. So that is beneficial, right? That is certainly good to have expert opinions on these things. At the same time, though, you and I can't really control those bureaucracies really effectively at all. We don't have an elective check over who is in charge of the EPA. We can't impeach them if we think they're doing just a horrible job and breaking the law. We can't do that. A lot of times as well, experts tend to have a bit of a narrow perspective on things, right? If you've been studying microbiology for the past 40 years of your life and you've got 3 doctorates in it and you've been teaching it for 20 years, right? If that's your thing, that's the lens through which you're going to look. And politicians need to have a much broader lens, right? They are not simply representing one tiny little segment of the population, but they've got to keep the whole big picture in mind, right? So they've got to keep environmental concerns, economic concerns, re-election concerns, global concerns, right? There's a much bigger picture, but having experts as the ones who create the policy, that can certainly lead to a bunch of issues. Now, that is certainly not the end all be all on the role of the bureaucracy, or whether or not it's appropriate for them to take on such a larger role. But I kind of got to end here since we're running short on time. So kind of be aware of this, right? Anytime the government does a thing, right? Anytime the federal government or the state level government does a thing, they're empowering somebody else to do it. So keep in mind, is that an appropriate delegation of authority? Yes or no? Take care, everyone.